In an era where phishing, malware, and AI-generated malicious domains are growing faster and faster than traditional controls can react, with attackers automating everything from discovery to deception, waiting to respond is no longer a viable strategy. It's going to dive into how a default deniable zero trust posture powered by deep visibility and controls like don't talk to strangers and zero trust DNS blocks threats before they execute, drives phishing to near zero and restores sovereign control over data and traffic. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the stage David Redekop, I hope I've said that correct, CEO and founder for ADAMnetworks.
Check. Salam alaikum. That's the extent of my Arabic. Thank you for having me. It's my very first visit to Riyadh. And I have to tell you, the food and the friendliness is absolutely amazing. I'm not talking about the food trucks out here. I'm talking about the real food that you make in your homes and even in the hotels, which is quite different from when I left Canada. When I left, of course we have the usual, we have to show our passport, and then you need to verify the passport to get off your hat. Now it's customary for me to wear my baseball cap. And so I'm used to then starting to take my baseball cap off, and the Air Canada attendant says, "Sir, you do not have to prove to me that you have no hair." So that was my goodbye message in Canada. So what I want to share with you today is just why we have some open-ended questions on why we have such a persistence in threats, why we have an ecosystem that still remains so incredibly vulnerable, and how we facilitate the threat actors' leverage, and what if we were to take a different approach, and then the result of taking the different approach. So first, the reason phishing is still a problem, we might be asking ourselves, or answer the question by just looking at the data. Why do we still have such a growth that happens week over week, month after month, and year over year? I remember being in this position about 10 years ago and thinking, this is going to be a problem for a short while longer, and then we'll figure it out. Well, if we look back at the last 5 years, we still have not done so. What's interesting is, even though all the big cloud providers, account providers, have practically enforced multi-factor authentication, where it's really hot right now is with small regional internet service providers. They typically do not have the infrastructure to make it easy to onboard clients with MFA. They're still using old POP3 and IMAP, so the world, 80% of the world's economic engine is still powered by small, medium businesses. That's where they are, and that's one of the interesting things that contributes to this. If we take a look at the overall cost of cybercrime, again, 10 years ago, we were predicting that just like we were going to reach peak oil, we thought for sure we will reach peak cybercrime. And I remember at that time getting into the cybercrime defense space, thinking that this is a short-lived problem. So the question is, why do we still see this growth after all this time? I didn't include this to expect anybody to be able to read it, but this here shows the MITRE attack matrix. And this hasn't really changed a whole lot, and yet this is exactly what attackers follow. You can see how complicated it is. So why is this still happening, that we're continuing to grow at this pace? And why are we allowing exfiltration to happen before we get to the response phase? So this is a very commonly accepted in this cybersecurity framework that gets applied to not only our processes, but the way we think about delivering services in the cybersecurity defense space. So the question we always have is, why is the response aspect so far down the cycle? So let's now shift a little bit to some data that might make some sense out of this. The world today has about 1 billion registered internet domain names. Now, what's interesting out of that large number is that only 60% of them are actually active. So 400 million or so domain names out of the billion are being registered, and they're just being sat on. No one knows why. You can make very good guesses as to which companies may have registered lookalike domain names, but they could also be owned by the attacker. It's not always obvious. But the point that I want to make out here is that out of all of those, only 1% are actually essential for a very broad range of businesses. And this is really interesting because out of that 1%, an individual enterprise actually only needs 0.0015%, which is too small to even show in this graph. So what we're dealing with when we're looking and hunting for threats is a numbers game that's really awkwardly outratioed. So we're looking for the threats amongst the blue and the red, when actually the only thing that we need is the yellow, and even less of that. So there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice this data. Infoblocks suggest that 85% of new domains are suspicious or malicious in nature overall. And by actual evidence, Inter-IL reports that 14 to 17% of domains registered in 2025 already show evidence of malicious behavior. So whenever there's a new domain, it's somewhere between 14 and 85% chance that it's not intended for good use. And the number of maliciously registered domain names still grew 149% year over year. So this problem has not been contained, even though 10 years ago we thought we are going to be able to contain this problem. And then just for kicks, I thought I'm going to check public suffix. Publicsuffix.org is where the official list resides of domain names, and sometimes just top-level domains that are actually registerable. And by the way, that's actually a really good trick to use to have your DNS resolver never go outside of that list, because there's also a lot of internal domain names, private domain names, that end up leaking out to the internet. Just take a look at some of the Verisign reports that shows what massive amounts of internal domain names are leaked to public resolvers. But what I noticed here is that there's now over 10,000 records in the public suffix list. So how are we going to keep track of that? So the way this happens, that all these attacks are possible, is that, as you can see here, the MITRE attack framework is on the left side, but the attack actually happens before the detect phase. Now you saw that there's a massive increase in AI on the offensive side. So adversaries have adopted AI much faster than the defensive side. So that means that the attack has become even more effective than our ability to detect. This is why, one of the reasons why we have this problem still. Now, I'm sure everybody in this audience is familiar with the very first report of AI orchestrated espionage. This Anthropic did a very deep dive to show how this was uncovered and then, of course, disrupted, as they would have to. But it's really important to understand that this is only the first. Now, what used to be the domain of the power of nation states is now in the hands of anybody with a small budget, with a keyboard, and internet access. And so we have to remember that that threat is now even larger than it was before. And I'm going to read to you a quote from Bruce Schneier, who years ago already wrote this. The serious threats are the ones that improve over time, that get better as the attackers learn more and collaborate. Some of you are familiar with what Lapsus Spider is doing. Attacks always get better, he says. They never get worse. The attackers have a natural advantage because they can concentrate their expertise on the one thing they're trying to attack, while defenders have to protect against everything. That's wisdom from Bruce Schneier. So here is an infographic from Beyond Identity, and what I want to point your attention to here is this number. The 4,151%. That is how the increase has been seen in the defensive use or the offensive use, right? Generative AI versus defensive deployment. So we have a lot of catching up to do just to be able to keep up with them. Now let me just switch the thinking now to some what if. What if we revisited a default deny all approach for every outgoing network connection? Okay, this is now getting to the very layer 2, layer 3 of the OSI model. And what if connections were limited to only the verified in known good destinations? What if all network states were resource bound and time bound? What if every TCP or UDP connection was accounted for before permission was granted? And what if this happened at the nearest layer 3 gateway with or without endpoint agents? And what if we gave end users the visibility? I don't know how many of you are using apps or seeing someone downloading and running an app without ever having the visibility of the connections that app is making. It's actually quite alarming what some apps do if you just have that observation. So what if your SOC had the ability to see the threats that were prevented as opposed to, oops, we saw an event here, we saw exfiltration, we saw C2 connection, and then we cut it off? And what if we became more context aware with protective DNS, not just company or organization wide, but have it narrowed down to smaller groups like departmental or role or even down to a device? And what if we could apply the principle of least privilege to all network traffic? And what if we moved the protective steps lower in the OSI model? I talked to some very sharp people that operate at layer 7, that do application security and are super wizards at it. And they want the lower level protection to be removed so that they can do everything at the top level. But what if we could do this and have even better coverage? Now, what if something like GitHub was accessible in your company designated browser, but not in PowerShell? We see a lot of the modern threats now that are not using any malware. I'm regularly involved in incident response cases, and the amount of times that there was 0 incidents of malware is now quite common. Somebody managed to socially engineer a user to copy and paste a PowerShell script, right? What if we could contain it so that everything that needs to be done works flawlessly? But when something like this happens, it's not something that the SOC shuts down after, it's prevented at execution attempt. What if you had clear visibility as a standard? Now, I took this screenshot because I just visited on Saturday news24.com, a popular news website in South Africa, and I thought, what are the amount of DNS queries that are being made just within the first second? And what you see on the left here, the green is allowed, the red is not allowed, but in any case, it shows you how active just one news website is with ads and trackers that don't serve you. Now, the answer to all of this is what we call zero trust connectivity, and it's made possible with Don't Talk to Strangers, Microsoft just 2 weeks ago at Ignite announced general availability of Zero Trust DNS. And Zero Trust DNS takes the same approach, but a similar approach, but uses a secure DNS client. So if you have a Windows 11 Enterprise and it is managed, say with Intune, you can now make use of the Microsoft Zero Trust DNS in conjunction with the protective DNS resolver to address some of these concerns. So what we did at ADAMnetworks is we built the world's first Zero Trust resolver. And this is just an illustration of how it works, but think of it this way. Every IP address that exists on the internet, or even laterally across other network segments, every IP address is a stranger until and if that verified endpoint is allowed to even resolve that destination. And at that point, there's a very short-lived outbound allow rule that gets destroyed after the time to live expires. So we're time bounding, resource bounding, and basically verifying every single network connection that happens, east-west, north-south. Now, the way it works is you can maybe read that at the very top here, I tried to ping an IP address that is owned by Akamai, where example.com is hosted. And you notice that I am not able to even reach it by ping. But if I then do a short dig, a DNS resolution for example.com, it shows me what all the IP addresses are, and now I'm able to ping it. And this is because the query came from a verified device that has permission to visit example, and it resolved it, and now I can go to any of those IP addresses for the period of time to live, and then it's going to get shut down again. So the 7 key values out of Zero Trust connectivity is, first, you neutralize 0 days before they can even be detected. There's exfiltration in private data, intellectual property theft that is denied in this process. And phishing risks are reduced down to near zero. In fact, less than 1%, but nothing is 100%, so near zero is accurate. It works with IoT and OT. It's a complete agentless approach as an option. The agent just gives you additional value, but therefore it gives you effective shadow IT mitigation. And there's also an executive order in 2209 that call for this kind of protection that is now a reality. So every single enterprise IP asset can be protected with Zero Trust connectivity. And what's really important for us as a company, and especially in this region, is that it's premised on sovereign data custody. You're not shipping all your traffic out to the web or to some point of presence that is then going to do deep packet inspection, decrypt everything. There is no deep packet inspection. There is no issue with encrypted client hello. SNI is not needed anymore because you're actually allowing or disallowing based on the source query, not by doing any deep packet inspection. Now I'm going to give you a couple of real quick examples of DNS harmony. That's also an important aspect of doing Zero Trust connectivity. DNS harmony is about doing aggregated DNS threat intelligence in real time. So in this example here, there's a website in Canada called OCS. It's a cannabis store. And it is considered not safe for work or not needed for work. And so here we're using Cloudflare for families. For this example, I'm using open and free protective resolvers that are available. But of course, you would substitute this with your enterprise info blocks service, for example. So I have done all 4 of them are queried: Cloudflare, Canadian Shield, Agile, and Quad9. But only Cloudflare blocked it, and so therefore the answer is not blocked, right? Yes, 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 no, the answer means no. No, yes, 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 the answer means no, right? If any one of them denies it, you are denied. Here's one, for example, just a threat that was uncovered last week by one of the security vendors, and I was curious who captured it as so far. Well, it turns out that only Quad9 of all the public protected resolvers is, as of Saturday morning, I think is when I took the screenshot, is blocking this particular domain name. Here's another one. I don't know what you, I love to be able to organically search without even vendors like Amazon tracking me. So I like to block third-party ad networks. And if you work for a third-party ad company, I'm sorry, make it a first-party ad. I pointed out with Krebs on security that Brian Krebs only ever used first-party ads on his website. And I feel like I was the only one that mentioned it to him, but I appreciate it. So let's go back to the first-party system. Anyway, AdGuard blocked this, but nobody else did. There's also a couple of others that I could show you where advanced persistent threats that end up in somebody's security research. This is some Google threat. Well, you don't need to know about it, right? If you're doing zero trust connectivity. Here's another one, a sophisticated attack by Morphisec. Again, we don't need to know about it because it was a threat. Because it's not part of your allow list. It's not part of a good reputation system, or it's using direct IP addresses like these ones here. Just can't reach them. And so indicators of compromise to me is the favorite time to check and validate that this approach actually prevents attacks before they can be detected. Not because we aggregate their threats, but in most cases, the threat was just hiding within a reputation. So thanks for stopping by, and appreciate the time today.